It's really my honor to be here, and I'm definitely here to serve and teach you. This is your talk, and I thank you for coming. I'm going to give it, but I really want it to be for you. And so do participate, ask questions. If you think you know more about a topic than I do, feel free to share information. Just be polite about it. Don't make me look stupid or anything like that. But no, seriously, some of you, I will learn things today from you, and hopefully you'll learn some things from me today too. So thank you very much for coming. I'm so excited to be associated with Bastyr Clinic. I've been at Bastyr Clinic for 26 years. I've actually been in practice for closer to 30, but at Bastyr Clinic for 26 of those. And this is an absolutely wonderful place. If you haven't experienced it as a patient yet, you've just got to do that. It's a wonderful place to get your health care too. But anyway, longevity. I can't actually remember what the name of this talk is officially, but I'm calling it Longevity, Living a Long and Healthy Life. There are a lot of ways to approach thinking about longevity and healthy aging. And each of you probably has your interest and your experience in your knowledge area already. I chose a particular angle. I chose a particular inroad into the topic, looking at inflammation. I'm a why person, and I'm hoping to teach you a little bit about my perspective on the why of this topic, and not just what to do. There's going to be plenty of what to do. But I think my experience is that if you leave with a little bit of understanding, you're more likely to enjoy making changes and understand why you'd be making changes and be motivated and have it be part of a natural transition to some other different piece of your lifestyle. So that's my angle. And if you've had time to look through the handout, there's tons of information in here. I'm actually instructed to get through the talk. I could back up, and there are some chairs in the front here if you'd like to sit in the front. My instruction is to keep my talk to an hour today, which is, I'm really long-winded and a poor limit setter, so that's just going to be a great challenge. And I think that my crew will forgive me if I run a little over, and hopefully you will too. I've got way too much information and enthusiasm to cover everything I'd like to talk about in an hour. So I better get started. So this 6 pages, it's a handout for you to take home. What I don't get to, you can look up. All these topics are discussed in wonderful resources online and in books and so on. There are plenty of experts around. You'll notice if you got a chance, we got here early and glanced ahead, that in the back is a section on nutraceuticals, or supplements, vitamins, special nutrient supplements, for that in one study or another, or in many cases many studies have been shown to promote longevity or healthy aging in one way or another. I will get to some of those in detail, but I put them at the end because it's actually not my emphasis. My emphasis, I'm going to talk to you today about, am I still on? Okay. I'm going to talk about inflammation and energy. Because let me just jump right in then. Clinical physiology, from my point of view, it's mostly about inflammation and energy supply. As it says, and I'm going to follow my handout. Please follow along with me. So I'm at the top now, going back to page 1, Roman numeral 1, item A. It says, cells in all tissue live longer, and it really is in all tissue, live longer if inflammation is minimal and cellular energy is plentiful. It's really about energy supply and managing inflammation. And as it says in item B, guess what depletes cellular energy the quickest? It turns out to be, in many cases, the inflammatory process itself. You guys mind if I sit down? Is that okay? So, when you think about inflammation, you're familiar with, some of you had a good idea perhaps what the physiology of inflammation entails. Whoa. And some of you don't. That's interesting. Some of you are jealous. You'd like to come up here and do that. Anyway, when you skin your knee, pretty quickly it turns red around the place it's skinned, and probably the next day it'll be even redder around the skinned area. That's actually, that redness and sometimes swelling and discomfort is an inflammatory process. If a bacteria moves in, then the immune system gets activated into its antibacterial mode, and there's a second kind of an inflammation process. It gets even redder and more swollen and more tender. So redder, swollen, and tender equals inflammation. And we're talking about on a macro scale. Well, who here is actually aware of the inflammatory theory and understanding of chronic illness that's being developed? Is this a new topic? Who's not aware of it? Just to give you an idea. All right. So what's coming out in just volumes and volumes and volumes of medical literature is that a really, really important common denominator in the development and progression of virtually nearly all chronic illness is an important inflammatory process or component. And I'm talking about hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, heart attack, stroke, dementia, aging of the brain, what else? Kidney disease, liver disease, skin disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The aging of tissue. And but I was talking about the skin knee. So what I want you to imagine, in your mind's eye, imagine, I mentioned to the skin knee and the redness adjacent is a macro-inflammatory process. So imagine a micro-inflammatory process that's happening in the lining of blood vessels, in the delicate tissues inside the kidney or the lung, in the brain cells themselves, inside the brain cells, and among the tissues inside the brain, next to, in and outside of the brain cells. There's a microscopic inflammatory process that, except for scale, resembles the inflammation that follows a traumatic injury of the knee almost exactly. And it turns out that this inflammation is it's a compartment or a task of the immune system. The inflammation and repair system. It's the immune system's job to come in and repair injured tissue, whether that tissue has been injured by trauma, skinned my knee, a toxic chemical that was in the food I just ate or the air I just breathed, a virus or a bacteria, a terribly, terribly stressful period in my life. These are all factors, nutritional excesses and deficiencies. If I eat too many burgers and fries, there are very pro-inflammatory factors in there that are actually injurious to tissue. All these things trigger the inflammation response part of the immune system. So the immune system comes in to repair that tissue. And the process itself is a little bit damaging, if you will, at a microscopic level. It's just like, imagine carpenters coming to repair a room that's got a hole bashed in the wall. Well, first you've got to cut out around the broken part, which requires enzymes and very powerful cells that it can actually, there's some damage that occurs in this process of inflammation repair. And so when this happens, you with me so far? You've got it.
Cut out, because I think surgery when you say that. Don't say cut out.
Cut out?
Yeah.
Okay, I won't say cut out ever again this morning. But if you can imagine that some cells have actually been injured when I skin my knee or at a micro level in the lining of my blood vessel or whatever because I eat too much fish and there's too much mercury in my diet. If a cell is injured, the inflammation repair part of the system does come along and have to remove the damaged and now injured cell, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Where does that damaged cell go? I mean,
it's broken into little pieces and hauled off, and much of it's recycled, and some of it goes out in stool and urine as waste or sweat as waste. Much of it's recycled. The body's, isn't it marvelous? It's absolutely marvelous. And so, but when this process is happening at a micro level, the end result is good. Inflammation and repair gets us to a good place. But when it's happening chronically at a low level, because of chronic virus, I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of, you get the idea. It really turns out to be that it's about managing inflammation and energy supply, because a cell that has lots of energy is available, the currency of energy at a biochemical cellular level is able to cope with these stressful processes of injury and repair and duress much better, to hold up longer under duress. Does that all make sense, more or less? All right. So this is my take on I'm going to call this the common denominator think of, so what is it that promotes healthy aging and longevity? It's whatever helps the body manage inflammation at a tissue cellular micro level better, and whatever helps the cells have an available energy supply to cope with the stress of that process is going to equal longevity, healthier cells in organs and tissues over time. And when I look at the whole field, that's what I see when I look at the why of the physiology and what's really going on. If you take that away, then this is going to be dynamic, and you'll understand why then all the rest of this unfolds. All right? So, as an example, I've started out by So just a little bit down the very first page. The first box here says activities that reduce cortisol in inflammation on the left, inflammation promoters are included on the right. And I snuck the word cortisol in there, by the way, because in general, where there's stress, there's cortisol. I'm not going to talk about that. I'll talk about it a bit as I go on. And also, you're all aware of the positive benefits. It seems like most things that are good for us are antioxidants, right? Antioxidants this, antioxidants, and they really are. Antioxidants are wonderful, and that is because this whole process at a micro level of inflammation, repair, or trauma, or whatever, that I'm telling you is going on in the lining of the blood vessels, that we now understand it's the inflammation that causes the blood vessels to constrict and people to develop high blood pressure. You with me? So, what was I going to say? Antioxidants, thank you very much. You'll be a big help to me. This will happen 3 or 4 more times. The antioxidants, it's really oxidative processes are a huge portion of what causes the injury. I talked about these powerful cells and powerful immune repair chemicals come in that are part of the inflammation repair process. A lot of the damage that occurs during this good process of repair is oxidative. So it turns out that antioxidants are maybe the most important group of nutrient factors that counter and help the body manage this inflammatory process. Did that make sense? You follow that?
So what does oxidation have to do with inflammation?
Many of the inflammatory processes or consequences are oxidative. A lot of what is damaging to the cells are oxidative processes in this whole milieu, this whole situation. Yeah, great. Good. I have to go off on another little tangent. I'm very prone to tangents, and hopefully you'll find this as interesting as I do. But we're going to talk about, you all have heard about quercetin and bioflavonoids and coenzyme Q10 and blah, 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 and all these wonderful nutrients. Coenzyme Q10 is not a great example. The proanthocyanidins from blueberries and pomegranate juice and some of the things I'm going to get to at the end. The reason that these nutrients are so... Oh, never mind. I'm going to save that. I'm going to save it till I get there. That was the wrong time to go off on that tangent. So back to the table. Activities that reduce cortisol and inflammation. What a surprise. Sleep. Getting adequate sleep. And there isn't a single thing on here that you can't Google online, or better yet, go to PubMed, the medical database for Library of Congress, and find article after article on, or at least one good article, but in most cases numerous articles. Getting regular, adequate sleep reduces inflammatory markers and compounds in the body and processes. Eating vegetables and high-fiber fruit. Same story. Eating less in general. This is really interesting. We're certainly in North America anyway. Many of us are an overfed population, and one of the things that the longevity research is the clearest on is that calorie restriction, just eating less on a regular basis, will predictably produce longer life, cellular life, and tissue life, and whole organism life than virtually any other intervention that's been studied. Isn't that interesting? Just eating less. Mm-hmm.
I thought carbohydrates is one of the biggest problems.
And he's asking if carbohydrates one of the biggest problems, and I'm inclined to agree with that. I think if there's a food category, a nutrient category that we're over-consuming the most, it would probably be carbohydrates. Next, it would probably be unnecessary saturated fats, but I think above all it would be carbohydrates. And one of the reasons that's such an important topic in longevity, and I'll come back to it later, is because as our bodies get older and we become more prone to our carbohydrate management system, which is where insulin comes in. You've heard of insulin? Yes. Becomes less accurate. And the older the body gets, the more delicate our glucose insulin response gets, and we get more prone to developing insulin resistance. It becomes which is I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it's the primary dysfunction of the whole blood sugar management system, and that system needs to be needs to have better care taken of it as the body gets older. So you're absolutely right. The most important nutrient group to be careful, to be very moderate about consuming as the older we get, decade by decade, would be carbohydrates, and very clearly simple carbohydrates, the low fiber carbs. So eating less, unstressed exercise. This one's really interesting. Unstressed exercise means, another way to describe that is low heart rate aerobics. I'm not saying don't ever do high heart rate aerobics. They have their positive benefits too. But interestingly, unstressed or low heart rate aerobics have the effect on the body of reducing, for a period of about 6 hours, the principal hormones that mediate the stress response, which, if you study the stress response, we're talking about cortisol and adrenaline. And that's part and parcel of why this kind of exercise has such a potent effect on reducing inflammatory processes.
Is that like walking?
Like walking's absolutely perfect. Yeah, when I was in my 20s, I would run and lift weights, and I just thought that was so cool, and walking was really square. And I'm in my late 50s now, and walking is so cool. It is really cool. It is really cool. If you walk, you're cool, in my book. Do put in some hills. Absolutely. Laughter and love. Absolutely dynamic. It's fascinating, wonderful, and I think intuitively very sensible to being relaxed, being in a loving setting at work and at home, having family, friends, and laughing and having fun, meaningful, satisfying things in life has actually been shown. It's published in great research to reduce inflammatory processes in the body. Maintaining healthy digestion. Some of you are probably aware of problems with weak digestion and gut permeability and gut toxicity. If the digestion is weak, if I don't have enough stomach acid, if my stomach doesn't produce enough acid, pancreas doesn't produce enough pancreatic enzyme, the bile from the liver is not flowing correctly, etc., or if things are just simply passing through me too quickly because I'm allergic to something I'm eating, and what happens is food arrives down in the lower bowel, the colon, partially digested. And that partially digested food is very likely to go through an abnormal, undesirable process of change under the influence of the bacteria that live there, and be turned into large, proteinaceous, for the most part, molecules that are absorbed in my body that aren't supposed to be in my body, that are very pro-inflammatory. Am I going too fast, or does that make sense?
Control that. That's not something that you can control.
Come talk to your naturopath. The question was how to control that. And there are classic signs of low stomach acid. Sometimes the diagnosis can be made very simply and symptomatically right in the office, such as too much fullness after eating, or excessive burping and belching and fullness after eating, for example. But if you have more of a question than that, I'd love to talk to you later. But it's actually not that difficult to assess how well people are digesting their food. So, healthy digestion, breathing. I'll talk at
Probiotics with that?
probiotics are really important, and I'll mention it later too. But healthy gut bacteria reduce that whole process of inflammatory compound production in the GI tract and improper absorption of upsetting inflammatory items from the digestive tract. That's right. Breathing. I'll get to breathing in a little bit, but it turns out providing adequate oxygen in particular to tissue ultimately adds to, and if it's part of the whole process of managing inflammation. Reducing tissue toxic burden. By that I mean cleansing, or what's popularly called detoxification. So cleansing on a regular basis and keeping the body's total toxic load to a minimum through regular healthy eating and living and regular sweating, and I'll go over that in a little bit too, is part of controlling the inflammation incitation process, a very important part. And then lots and lots of nutrients from food and from supplements both are relevant to that process of controlling inflammation. So, and then on the other side, the inflammation, same box or same table, other side, the inflammation promoters include anything that increases cortisol, sleep deprivation, insulin resistance, and from some of the things I've said you can imagine. understand why this is beginning to be true. But in the setting of insulin resistance, blood sugar climbs. This is the beginning of type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes. And the higher the blood sugar goes after eating, and the higher it stays between meals, higher blood sugar, it's one of the best established triggers of inflammatory excess, inflammatory processes in the body. So insulin resistance and higher blood sugar is absolutely a critical part of this discussion, which is where the carbohydrates come in that you mentioned we talked about earlier. And managing carbohydrate intake as I move through my decades. More toxins absorbed in my body from my own metabolism, from my diet, from my environment. That equals more inflammation. Stress. Bunch of papers have been studied that correlating increased stress of different sorts with we can actually measure increases of the inflammatory compounds in the bloodstream. It's fascinating. Did you all know that? We're not theorizing about this. If I tell you something today that is my theory, I'll try to remember to say so. If I don't say it, then I could produce an article it's really quite factual. Although, in all honesty, a great deal of what we are pretty darn sure is very factual and true today in medicine and science. And give us 20 years, we'll find out it wasn't. But so do keep a sense of humor. Anyway, I digress. The extra body fat increases inflammatory mediators in the body. Sedentary lifestyle, simply not getting enough exercise, increases inflammatory mediators in the body. Weak digestion, talked about that. Tobacco, there's a no-brainer. And then fried and deep-fried food, another no-brainer. So moving on down the page, I think I mentioned inflammation equals oxidation. When I say oxidation, you've heard of reactive oxygen species and free radicals and so on. If you read an article about blueberries and how they're helpful, or quercetin and how it's helpful, you've read about or N-acetylcysteine or alpha-lipoic acid or glutathione. You've probably read about how these wonderful antioxidants control the oxidative processes, and they'll always talk about the antioxidant quenching free radicals or getting rid of these molecules that mediate this destructive oxidative inflammation-producing process. And these are called reactive oxygen species or free radicals. Who's heard of those and who hasn't? Just out of curiosity. That's yes? That's all right. So somewhat new. All right, well, I will try not to get too into those details. But something else that I want you to, I think it's a very useful part of the takeaway. I hope it's not too much detail, but to me it's an absolutely fascinating part of this puzzle, longevity, because it's important, when we talk about longevity, it's important to remember, I'm on item D here on the first page, in the middle of the first page, Roman numeral 1, item D. The body's not designed to last forever. In individual cells and cell types and individual cells themselves are not designed to last forever. In fact, we don't want them to last forever. If a cell loses its ability to actually die at an appropriate time, we call it a cancer cell. That's one of the actual defining characteristics of a cancer cell. They live way too long and reproduce real fast and virtually never die. And so the big problem with cancer is just too many of them, and they crowd other things out. I was
reading someplace says designed for 40 years only.
40 years?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that number. It probably depends on the type of cell. But anyway, we all know, for better or for worse, that our bodies are not designed to last forever. That's one of the great lessons of being here in the first place. And neither are the individual cell types or cells themselves. They're programmed to die through partially understood complex genetic programming and messaging and so on. And that is called apoptosis. Some of you have probably heard that word, maybe a lot of you haven't. It's a very, do you see that word, apoptosis? It's one funny word, isn't it? Would anybody like to say that word out loud? Does anybody know whether, I'm actually not sure, is it apoptosis or apoptosis? I've heard it many, many times both ways.
Ptosis means something that fails, but I don't know the first, the prefix.
Yes. Yes.
You know, the suffix means falling of some sort.
Falling. Demetrius is from Greece, so you may know the Greek roots. Yeah. Anybody else need a lesson in Greek afterwards? But anyway, I'm going to say apoptosis because I feel funny when I say apoptosis, but that might be more correct. Although maybe funny is good. Anyway, but apoptosis is a natural process of cell death. The point is that we want our cells to last as long as they're supposed to, and when they die early, that's not such a good thing. And that when they last a long time, that equals longevity. They last a long time appropriately. So, as you can imagine, then putting together what I've been speaking about, too much inflammation and oxidation, and not enough energy supply, equals early apoptosis, early programmed or natural cell death, if you will. Cell loss, and cumulative cell loss equals tissue loss, equals organ loss and organ malfunction. So back to the beginning then. I'm on F. I'm on F.
When you're using the term energy here,
Yeah, what do I mean by energy? Thank you. When I'm talking about, because I've been saying over and over and over that one way to look at it, I think a good way to look at it, is that longevity of tissue is produced by controlling inflammation and making sure that the cells have abundant energy supply. And what I'm talking about is at a cellular level. I'm talking about the chemistry of energy. And if you took high school chemistry and remember, at some point you studied a molecule called ATP. And if that was a traumatic experience in itself and you've blocked that out, then you're forgiven. I hope you passed the course, and if you didn't, you're still forgiven. But in any case, ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and I've got that spelled out later on. But ATP is a molecule it's the currency of energy in the body. The phosphorus, it's an adenosine molecule with 3 phosphorus molecules attached to it, and you know phosphorus. Phosphorus is what's in matches. Strike a match, flame, hot. Nature uses phosphorus to store energy. In our bodies, it's a brilliant system, and our bodies do too. In this 3 phosphorus molecule called ATP, the cells make it. And a cell that it's made by groups of series of enzymatically driven processes requiring special nutrients and proteins. B vitamins, magnesium are an important part of that. Virtually all environmental or synthetic chemicals that get into our body, whether it's a toxic metal or a volatile organic compound from the paint that I've just put in my house, or the vinyl chloride that's off-gassing from my new car, all these things interfere with the production of ATP at a cellular level. And they all also incite inflammatory processes in my tissues. You with me? So, and viruses do that too, and so on. So anything that slows down that ATP or energy producing machinery would be disrupting the energy creation system. Does that make better sense now? All right. You're welcome. And like I said way back in the beginning, the inflammation itself, because of all the trash that's produced and heavy stuff that's going on, often winds up being hard on the ATP production process, and it depletes ATP, or energy, because it takes a lot of cellular energy just to cope with the duress that's going on in the cell at that moment. That's pretty technical, but thank you very much for taking that away. So back to the beginning, I'm on F. Excluding acute trauma and poisoning, it's fair to say that cells die early. Well, I kind of just said this, when they can no longer make enough energy to keep up with cleaning and repairing themselves. And that's a simpler way to look at it. If you've kind of got a headache from all this stuff I've been saying, just remember this. And again, for the most part, it's chronic inflammatory and oxidative challenges inside the cell that drain the energy supply. So, and then G, this one's kind of a summary. It's important, so I put an underline under it. Limiting inflammatory process and extends the life of cells. And helping cells make more energy extends their life too. All right, little bit more of the physiology, and then we'll get into some of the stuff. Genetics do play a role. Some people are born with genes that help them cope with all the environmental viruses or environmental chemicals or whatever, stress, emotional stress, better than others. But I'm not going to go into, I think I'm going to just give you a little overview of I and J. There's a subject called epigenetics here, which I'm in, and if you're interested, you can Google on that and read more about it. That's what I and J are about. But what this is saying is that all of us have genetic messages that help stored in our DNA that help us live, our cells and tissues live longer, cope with these various stresses, tissue stresses better, and all of us have genes that code for coping less well. Genes that make us, if they're turned on, make us more susceptible to developing high blood pressure, or more susceptible to not managing inflammation well, or more susceptible to developing a cancer. And these genes don't have to be expressed. It's really interesting. I think that it's something that's not talked about enough. We all think of genetics as a sentence, right? If it's in my DNA that it's going to happen, it's not true. The DNA is like a library, and my body goes to the DNA and opens up pages or takes out a book and reads it if it's interested or if it needs it. But there's lots of genes that never get turned on, and a lot of those, it's a good thing because they're not so hot. And so what one wants to do is live a life, or if you're into supplements, take the supplements that turn on the genes that promote longevity, and don't turn on, keep the genes that dispromote longevity turned off. And it's very interesting that what you all will recognize as a very healthy lifestyle do just that. Eating an absolutely marvelous diet full of fresh vegetables of multiple colors that are low in agricultural and processing chemicals will do just that. Plant compound and plant nutrient after plant nutrient's been shown to do just this. This is the biggest piece of what epigenetics is all about. It's really, really exciting. If you're interested in it, read a little bit more about it. So there's just that's plenty, maybe more than enough, but plenty of physiologic background. But it's easy to get excited knowing that kind of thing about. The reason I shared it with you, and I thank you for going through that with me, is because I think you getting the idea, you can be genuinely confident that your body is prepared to do a marvelous job in this life if you give it a chance. And that's what the rest of the talk is about.
What would be a good bookstore for this information? Is there one in Seattle?
Does anybody know a good bookstore for this information? I have gotten into the internet. I'm internet dependent now. We have books in the dispensary. Thank you very much. All right, so we're on page 2. I forgot to say, we're on page 2 here. Roman numeral 2, what we call the determinants of health. The determinants of health is a term that naturopaths use a lot, naturopathic physicians use a lot. These are the behaviors. You see the very first one. These are behaviors and habits that we can choose to adopt to whatever extent that have a principal determining effect on our health. That's why it's pretty straightforward. That's why we call them the determinants of health. The first one, I'm going to talk about sleep and exercise and breathing and etc. Not a surprise, but I hope I'll say some things that are provocative. So I'm going to start out here. I'm on Roman numeral 2, middle of second page, item A, sleep, little a. I'm going to just go down this list. Most research tells us that the average person needs 8+ hours of sleep per night. And if you're really into reading sleep research, you'll know that what I said, that actually the articles talk about numbers that are all over the map. There's a couple articles that have been published that say, well, we really only need 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And honestly, I just throw those away right away. Those are outliers. There are some that are concluding that we need more like 10 or 11 or 12. But anyway, but most articles agree that we need around 8+ hours of sleep.
It has to be continuous?
And there's a lot of individual variation. Our biochemical clock, we all have a biochemical clock. It involves melatonin and so on, some chemicals you've heard of, sets the sleep cycle in motion about 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. And most of us ignore this. In fact, most of us don't even know that there's a biochemical clock. If you think about it, who's aware of right around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, you experience that first nice, yummy, relaxing yawn. You think, oh, that was nice, and then you change channels or turn the page of your book or start the vacuum cleaner or whatever you do. That yawn was the signal. It's absolutely a brilliant system. It's just we're not paying attention to it. That's the signal that the sleep chemistry in my brain is actually started to move, started to progress. And it'll actually try to keep progressing even if I ignore it, and that's when things get confusing. The longer one waits past this first sleep signal to go lie down and go to sleep, the more sleep quality is reduced once I do go to sleep, because I'm trying to enter a biochemical sequence that manages biochemical sequence that manages what sleep is at a tissue level in the middle of that sequence. And it works, but not as well. It doesn't work as well jumping on that bus when it's already moving. It works, but not as well. I'm much less, the longer I wait after the initial signal, the less likely my brain is, for example, to reach the deeper, more regenerative alpha states of sleep and so on.
Is there anything wrong with if a person wakes up and then just takes a shower and does something else and goes back to sleep? Does it have to be continuously?
Question, does it have to be continuous? Is it okay if you get up and do something and then go back to sleep? I think, I don't have time to talk a lot about sleep problems and sleep management, but whatever you're doing that improves your total sleep gain each night, keep doing it. And if you'd like to have a more detailed conversation, because a lot of us, especially as we get older, and I know, the sleep chemistry gets off, and it's for lots of reasons, and so don't feel bad if you're one of us. Don't feel bad. I do mention some sleep aids at the bottom here, and I won't go over them in much detail, but there are some sleep aids at the bottom. And I also want to say that for any one of these, I'm going to talk about sleep and exercise. So if you have terrible arthritis in your knee and so you can't exercise the way somebody else can, or if you're sleep challenged for hormonal reasons or whatever, and you're working on that, don't feel like it's a total loss. If whatever you can do in any one of these areas of the determinants of health really well will have similar effects and will shore up what you're not gaining in one of the other areas, because it all works together. They all have similar effects. So anyway, I'm going to move to the box then at the bottom of page 2, benefits of good quality, adequate sleep. More energy. There's a no-brainer. Better mood. Better memory and cognitive function, less inflammation. And obviously, given that all I've been speaking about inflammation, you're understanding that would be a very good thing when it comes to longevity. Lower blood pressure, less pain. This one is fascinating. It turns out that if I'm chronically sleep deprived, my brain will actually turn up the amplification on the center in my brain that interprets pain messages, receives and interprets or evaluates pain messages from the nerves out here in my body. So if I have an arthritic knee, or if I have fibromyalgia and an achy muscle, or whatever it may be, if I'm chronically sleep deprived, the pain center, interpretive centers in my brain actually will evaluate a higher level of input. And it's all about interpretation and reception than if I'm not sleep deprived. Does that make sense? Isn't that interesting? So this is fairly new, just in the last few years that we've learned this. If I get good quality, adequate sleep, my body will secrete more growth hormone, more testosterone. And actually, it doesn't exactly probably secrete more growth hormone, but it secretes the growth hormone in a more correct way that involves some large surges that create peaks in the middle of the night while I'm asleep. And we're not quite sure what these peaks are for, but it looks like those peaks may be necessary to do some of the important work that growth hormone does. Growth hormone, by the way, and those of you who are actually into the whole hormonal angle on longevity management may even know more about this than I do. But growth hormone is a wonderful, wonderful potent hormone that is made by the pituitary gland that brings about increased muscle mass, increased bone mass, increased various tissue functions. It's a hormone of building and longevity, very much a hormone of building and longevity, which is why so much of the medical approach to longevity now involves growth hormone and growth hormone research. Has anybody here actually been looking into that at all? You don't have to admit it if you don't want to. Yeah. All right. Mm-hmm. But our brains do produce growth hormone, and so I'm here to tell you that actually living a healthy lifestyle, including managing as normal a sleep cycle as you can, will actually increase your body's production of growth hormone naturally.
And you may address it, but what is the purpose of the testosterone? I mean, I understand it as a male hormone.
Yeah.
What is the function of it in women?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Testosterone, women's bodies make some testosterone too. It's made by your adrenal gland. You have two adrenal glands, and they sit on top of the kidneys right back here. The adrenal gland in women, even after menopause, continues to make small amounts of testosterone. And in both men and women, testosterone is a hormone that's similar to growth hormone in many ways. Maintains brain tissue mass, muscle tissue mass, bone tissue mass, cognitive function, memory, and so on. Was that helpful? Okay, you're welcome. Let's see. So I was talking about growth hormone. I'm on the next one on this list of benefits of good quality adequate sleep is lower body mass index. That's the BMI. That body mass index is the ratio of total fat tissue in my body to total muscle mass in my body. So more fat in my body equals higher blood sugar and more inflammation, and is a risk factor, obviously, for heart disease and high blood pressure and lots of other things. Better blood sugar control, less insulin resistance if I'm sleeping well, more efficient tissue recovery from injury, less infection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you look over on the other side of this table, the cost of long-term sleep deprivation, a lot of what you'd expect is over there. More cortisol and adrenaline secretion. Early apoptotic loss of brain cells. This is interesting. It's thought that that's an influence of the stress hormone release that occurs when I'm chronically sleep deprived. From the body's point of view, not getting enough sleep is a stressor. The body actually can't tell at a physiologic biochemical level the difference between my boss yelling at me and a saber-toothed tiger outside the cave and me not getting enough sleep on a regular basis. The hormonal response is the same. The body secretes a lot of cortisol and secondary adrenaline. And some of you have studied that. Have you all looked into cortisol a little bit?
What do you think about naps? Not in lieu of nighttime sleep, but some say don't take naps, keep yourself awake until nighttime.
So Anne's asking, what do I think about naps? I think if naps are working for you, then take naps. We're in the sleep at night, don't sleep in the day habit here in North America for the most part, but an awful lot of the world sleeps in two divided chunks, and it's working very well for them. So, and I don't really have a comment about that. If you feel well and you feel rested and you're napping, keep it up. Great. So, but it turns out that the cortisol is a good hormone, but too much cortisol winds up having a destructive effect on tissue. And one of the destructive effects too much cortisol has is it actually corresponds with increased rate of early death of brain cells, just tissue mass loss in the brain. It's thought to be one of the contributing factors to developing dementia as our brain ages. It's just higher cortisol levels in our blood. Number C, more inflammation. Number D, I said this already, more pain, heightened pain perception, more depression, decreased memory and cognition, reduced muscle mass, you get the idea. More insulin resistance if I'm tired all the time, if I'm not getting enough sleep, higher blood pressure, on down. Oh, the last one on the list, L, is interesting. I just read in an article earlier this week as I was preparing for this talk. Over here it says, increasing breakdown of collagen fibers in the skin, and skin aging. You with me? You see where I am here? And if you're at all vain like me, and I'm not accusing you of anything, I'm saying that, well, it's not my highest priority. I'm noticing my skin changing, and not that I'm doing all that much about it, but I was fascinated to know that other than eating a pretty darn good diet, I'd like to say. But which, as we go along here, you're getting the idea, is a very powerful thing to do. Fascinating. I did not know that being chronically sleep deprived increases the breakdown of collagen fibers in the skin, and accelerating the process of skin aging. And they're doing studies and showing that you can acutely sleep deprive a person in a matter of minutes or hours, start to see observable physiologic in color and blood perfusion and different changes in the skin. You know, isn't that interesting? Just absolutely fascinating. So, and I've got some more in here about good things that are good for the skin too. For not that any of you care, I'm the only vain one here, but all right. So we're on page 3. You saw me flip page 3. Moving along to exercise. Exercise will do almost all the same things that good sleep does. Aren't our bodies amazing? This is why I said if you're not sleeping great, but you can get yourself out and walk for a mile, or better yet, 2 miles a day, and it doesn't have to be real fast walking, then that'll make up to a significant extent for the detriment from this cumulative sleep loss. Does that make sense? Because, yeah, the body's full of wonderful checks and balances like that. And of course, doing both is better still. Exercise will increase cellular energy. It's a classic example at the biochemical level of use it or lose it. If I'm exercising a lot, then my muscles need a lot of energy, right? So it stimulates, and my lungs need a lot of energy, and my heart needs, because I'm using them when I exercise. And so that sends the message to that tissue to beef up its enzyme-driven, energy-producing, ATP, energy-producing machinery. And tomorrow and the next day and the next day, there will be more available ATP or energy inside the cell. Does that make sense? Because I exercised today and last week. Exercise increases the number of muscle-to-nerve intersections. It does it in about 8 hours. That's absolutely wonderful. I kind of have to speed up, so I wish I could tell you everything about this, but it increases the number of muscle-to-nerve cell intersections, and it starts to do that in about 8 hours after exercise. In other words, one of the responses at a tissue level to exercise is that the body starts connecting the nerve to the muscle through which the muscle gets the messages to work better and better. It's thought to be one of the reasons that with even after just a few days of conditioning exercise, I start to feel less traumatized by it. You know how if you haven't been exercising in a while, you feel cruddy when you go out, and it's a disincentive to start. So maybe this is the takeaway. Know that within 8 to 16 hours after the first time you exercise, you get off the couch and start. Your body will start to actually rearrange its relationship between nervous system and muscle and produce more ATP energy inside those muscle cells. Within a few days of keeping it, this actual tissue level conditioning starts to shift over rapidly, and you'll get through that difficult period and feel better and better as you do it. All right. Exercise increases sleep quality and normalizes sleep chemistry. Exercise actually is one of the better things and most natural interventions. It's actually been shown to correct that sleep biochemical cycle sequence I mentioned, that's if it's become disrupted. Improves mood and happiness, increases secretion of endorphin hormones. These are hormones secreted by our brain that improve mood and immunity and help the body, in fact, control inflammation. Very powerful inflammation controllers. Reduces cortisol. I'm on F now, and under exercise I'm on F. Reduces cortisol and adrenaline output. This is really interesting. I talked earlier about low heart rate versus high heart rate aerobics. High heart rate aerobics, again, would be power weightlifting or running wind sprints repeatedly. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying we were really, I suppose, surprised, and then after a while not surprised about 10 years ago when the papers were published that showed that people that focus, probably overly focus on high heart rate, very challenging, aggressive exercise, get just as much hypertension and just as many early heart attacks as people who don't exercise at all. Because high exercise, that very challenging exercise, does not bring about this wonderful stress reduction that I'm talking about in item F here, item F, that low heart rate or gentle aerobics brings about, which is for about 6 or 8 hours after you take that walk, or you get on your treadmill, you just keep your heart, by low heart rate, I mean keep your heart rate below, it depends on your age and your conditioning, but below 100, 115, 120, 125 at the most. And if you're older, use a lower number. It'll reduce these stress, inflammation promoting hormones for a period of 6 or 8 hours every time you do it. It's absolutely marvelous. Reduces blood pressure and heart rate, increases oxygen delivery to tissue, and induces sweating, which is an absolutely marvelous route out of the body. My specialty, Seth mentioned it really quick, but longevity is actually not my specialty at all. My specialty, or one of them anyway, in the Bastyr clinic upstairs, is depuration therapy or detoxification therapy or cleansing therapy, about diagnosing and managing in my patients the relationship between chemicals they're exposed to in the environment and their health, either preventively or a health issue that one has at the moment. And it's so absolutely wonderful. Virtually every toxin studied, which includes some 13 toxic metals that have been studied, and volatile organic compounds and insecticides and so on, they all come out beautifully through the skin when we sweat. There was actually a paper published a few years ago that I dug up that compared people that worked at a factory, and I can't remember if they were exposed to, it was either mercury or PCB. It was one of those two, because at work, and they took two groups of people from the same factory with the same level of exposure on a day-to-day basis, and they were chosen. One group of people exercised to a sweating point, they vigorously enough to sweat. I think it was 2 or more times a week, and the other group didn't. You with me so far? And they tracked over time the quantity of whatever toxin it was they were being exposed to at the factory in their blood. And the group that wasn't sweating accumulated it over time at a rate, the curve had a slope. In other words, it went up and up and up in their body. And the other group accumulated a little, but it was much, much lower. And the only difference in their lifestyles and everything they could find was this exercise habit. And does that make sense? Is this good news or what? Absolutely good news. It's marvelous. So, absolutely. Get that stuff out. Because like I said earlier, all that stuff, these poisons have both direct injurious toxic effects on tissue and then secondary or indirect effects by inciting the inflammatory destructive processes I've been describing. All right, so I'm going to move along to breathing.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Uh-huh.
So if you're laying down in a sauna,
Uh-huh.
nothing but sweating, is it equally?
Thank you very much. Question is, does sauna work? Do you have to be exercising and sweating for this to work? And the answer is any kind of sweating has been shown to do the same thing. Sauna works absolutely marvelously. Hot tub works great too. The one problem with the hot tub is that then a lot of the toxins are in the water, and now I'm kind of swimming in that, which sort of bothers me. But
yeah, I'm just curious. I know that sometimes I do pretty good at doing aerobic exercising, but I don't sweat much. How do you get yourself to sweat more?
yeah, the question is about what do you do if you don't sweat well, and come up and ask me afterwards for more detail about that. But in simple, almost everyone who is a non-sweater, if you will work at it in a sweat promoting environment, whether it's with exercise or better yet, I would use a therapeutic thermal chamber. I would use a sauna or something, and you can talk to me. But we've seen it in patient after patient after patient. If you'll work at it slowly but surely, your skin will regain the ability to sweat or gain it for the first time, almost always. So breathing, relaxed whole chest breathing. And by whole chest, I mean you've been taught that a relaxing. Different people at different times have focused on belly breathing, and belly is important. But we've learned in biofeedback training that we've taught belly breathing so well that a lot of people are trying to do a relaxed breath, and all that's going out is the belly, and the chest isn't going out. I'm sorry, I just banged my microscope. I mean my microscope. What's this called again? Microphone. Yeah, but what you want is a relaxed breath. You want your chest and your abdomen to expand. So nice and slow. the whole thing. That's wonderful. I'm going to do that again. No, I'm not. I got too much to talk about. But increasing delivery of oxygen to tissue, including the lining of blood vessels, will cause vasodilation. It'll actually vasodilation means widening of the blood vessel, increased delivery of blood, nutrients, oxygen, healing factors to the downstream tissues. Reduces actually having ultimately an anti-inflammatory effect. There is a legitimate anti-inflammatory effect to regular deep breathing. And of course, you know about its lowering blood pressure and so on. It's been shown, actually, it's marvelous. One doesn't have to breathe like that intentionally every second of the day for this to work. A really neat paper 2, 3, 4 years ago reported that it was, I'm making up the details, but it was more or less that people who breathed, I think it was did this exercise for 2 minutes, it was 5 or 6 times a day, so short period of time, frequently, breathed more and more correctly and deeply, unconsciously, because they retrained their unconscious habit, and that alone brought about significant decrease in blood pressure and other stress-related symptoms. Does that make sense? Absolutely marvelous. I talked about happiness earlier. I'm going to jump right over that one, but not because it doesn't deserve it, but I think you all understand it. And interestingly, there are papers being published that are speaking about longevity and people who have more healthy, happy social life and family life and interconnectedness in society and community and so on. It's really cool. All right, the next page is my basic cleansing diet. Instead of filling up a page with specific individual tidbits about different dietary constituents and inflammation, what I did, I decided to give you my basic cleansing diet. So this is a diet that I use. Like I said, I do an awful lot of work with patients who have environmentally related illness related to toxic accumulation of synthetic chemicals and metals from the environment. This is the diet that I almost universally use to help the body reduce its burden of whatever, natural or unnatural toxic accumulation. But like it says at the very top, next to basic cleansing diet, in the underlined part at the top, it says, you could also call this the health and longevity promoting diet. And you could call it the cancer, dementia, and heart disease prevention diet. Because if you look at, it's very similar in many ways to macrobiotic diet. It's very similar. It's essentially identical to the diets that have been shown to be helpful for preventing or managing all of these chronic illnesses. Why? Because it's very, very anti-inflammatory, for one. Number two, it's very detoxifying. But ultimately it's very anti-inflammatory, bottom line. And then it's full of nutrients that help the body, the cells, make energy better. Back to that original premise. Control inflammation, make energy better, tissue will live longer. So it talks about organic foods and the dirty dozen. Is everybody here? I'm in the second paragraph here. Is everybody aware where it starts out? Eat organic foods if possible. If you can't afford to eat your diet entirely organic, which is true for most of us, I think the Environmental Working Group EWG.org publishes a list of fruits and vegetables and fruits in order of their total measurable agricultural chemical content, which is absolutely marvelous. The top 12 are called the Dirty Dozen, and if you can afford to eat organic from the 6 most polluted vegetables, or the 8 most polluted, or the 12, whatever. They said so that it's the peaches this year, and this list is updated every year, but peaches, apples, bell peppers, celery, etc. These are foods that I don't know about you, but most of us eat a lot on a regular basis. I certainly do. So if I can eat organic, that 12 organic, then I'm avoiding some very large 70, 80, 90% of foodborne pesticides, because these are the most concentrated vegetables and fruits when it comes to pesticides.
So is this list in order? Like
if I could only afford
Yes, this list is in order. For 2000, I don't know if this is the 2010 list or 2011 list, but you can go, I think it's 11, but you go to ewg.org every year, and they publish it up through 40 or 45, which is really cool. Turns out that number 44 or 5 or whatever it is, are at the bottom two are onions and avocados. I was absolutely thrilled because avocados are kind of expensive, and their pesticide exposure is completely negligible. So walk right past the organic avocados and buy the, you know what I'm saying, with a clean conscience. Happy to know. Happy to know. And broccoli, which is an absolutely wonderful healing food that I'll talk about, is way down the list, number, I don't remember, 38 or something. It's great.
When you talk about this oxidation on these stuff, dirty stuff, what about if you take the skins off first, like to the apples?
Yeah, so what about if you take the skins off first? So you could do that, and if you took the skin off, you would certainly be missing a lot of the pesticides. But you wouldn't be missing them all, because most of them are oil soluble and will make their way through the skin into the pulp. But also you'd be losing most of the antioxidant value. Most of the antioxidants in a vegetable or fruit are in the skin. Not all, but most. So you'd be giving up a ton of the nutrient value of the apple. But if you're going to eat a non-organic apple, that's certainly an option, is to peel it. But wanted to point out that vegetables and fruit, I'm in the next paragraph here, my prescription for an ultimately healthy diet is to make 60 to 70% of the bulk of your diet healthy, mixed color vegetables and high fiber fruits. That's a big target, but I promise you it's doable. And the older my body gets, the more important it is for me to do that. Because remember, we talked about carbohydrates earlier. If I will do that, then I'm so full I can't actually overindulge in complex or simple carbs. It works out beautifully. Why? Because that's where all the fiber is, and I'm full. So I'll let you read through this in detail on your own, but a couple more points to hit. The next paragraph is about cabbage family vegetables. The cabbage family vegetables contain at least a couple compounds that enhance cellular production of energy, of ATP, that are cofactors, a couple of marvelous compounds that vigorously support that enzymatic machinery and help it work quicker, better, and just be more present, that produces ATP or energy inside the cell. They're absolutely marvelous. Everybody, we should all be eating a serving of vegetables from this family at least once a day, and nothing wrong with 2 or 3 times a day. Absolutely marvelous healing foods. And that includes bok choy, and it's quite a large family.
I was reading about the nutrients in kale and that chemical.
Kale's in that family.
And it said that they were goitrogenic, and it freaked me out, and I thought,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop.
Ann's asking about what about the fact that these are goitrogenic, mean that there is a compound in the same family of foods that is weakly thyrosupressive. And since I don't have time to elaborate, I think it's a minimal concern.
I still eat them.
Yeah. If a person has hypothyroidism and is trying to manage their hypothyroidism, which means weak thyroid, without hormone, then it's probably a consideration. For people who are not hypothyroid, it's a non-consideration. It's irrelevant. And for people who are hypothyroid and who are on medication, it's irrelevant. Does that make sense? So, relevant to a fairly small group. Concentrated carbs are covered here. Fiber is absolutely marvelous. Fiber is fiber. I'm absolutely in love with fiber. Fiber is it cleanses the bowel. It cleanses the. You've heard about fiber being a blood cleanser. It's a blood cleanser not by going into the blood. Fiber stays in the gut. One of fiber's great values is that the fiber in the meal I just ate, about 2 hours later, is right down here, about 8 inches into my small intestine, just after my stomach, where the bile drains from the gallbladder. And it's all timed. It's timed. The body's really smart. It comes down about 2 hours after 8. Why? So that the toxic material in that bile, because this is an excretory product, toxins that my liver is culled out of my blood and is excreting in the bile, will encounter that fiber. The fiber is a sponge, soaks up that toxic stuff, and takes it on out with my stool. If I'm eating a low fiber diet, that doesn't happen, And the large majority of those toxins that my liver went to all that trouble to excrete just get reabsorbed. So the biocleansing effect of fiber is not direct. It doesn't go into the blood. It's indirect through dramatically reducing the reabsorption of liver-excreted toxic material, which includes mercury and all kinds of fuel, petroleum breakdown products, and volatile chemicals and insecticides and all kinds of stuff. First over here.
So I'm just curious that the new range is, raw and with all the enzymes that need to stay intact with the vegetables so that you can really get what you need from them. But what about if you're cooking broccoli or cabbage or any of those things, are you still going to get sort of like the oomph that's going to help you make the ATP?
So the question is not about fiber, but it's about ATP. Do cooked vegetables promote the production of ATP and energy as well as uncooked vegetables? In general, yes. As long as you're not overcooking them in water that you're throwing away, and a lot of their nutrients went into the water and you threw the water away, say. You know what I'm saying? If I boil them and then throw the water away and just eat the vegetable, then I've lost a lot of their nutrients because it went into the water. But if I eat the water...
But if you steam, you don't eat it.
If you're steaming, then that doesn't happen. But I think that the whole subject of raw food is really interesting, and there isn't much data on it, but I think it's really intriguing and probably very, very healthy for people that tolerate it. But I'm not aware that cooking food limits its support of this wonderful energy and inflammation controlling process.
As long as you drink the water.
Mm-hmm.
That you cook the food in, sorry.
Right.
What's the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber? And then I see that on some fiber supplements, or I see it on
Yeah. So soluble means will dissolve in water. And have you ever used psyllium husk powder or apple pectin? Did you put it in water and stir it up or shake it up? If you do that and you watch it sit for a second, it'll form this grayish brown cloudy gel in the jar because it actually at a micro level kind of dissolved in the water and then goes through this and then soaks up the water. It means it dissolves in the water a little bit.
Can I recorrect you?
Yes.
What I meant was not so much whether it dissolves in water, but what does it do? What is the soluble and insoluble fiber?
Oh, functionally, what's the gain difference? Yeah, thank you. They're both great. Both oat bran and apple pectin, good examples of insoluble fiber and soluble fiber, have been shown to clear toxic metal from the GI tract. But
Soluble fiber still stays in your tract and doesn't go into your circulatory system.
thank you very much. Neither one, if it's got fiber after it, it's not absorbed. Stays in the GI tract, goes on out. In general, though, when they're compared head to head, the pectin type, psyllium husk type, water soluble fibers absorb those toxins a little bit better than cellulose, non-dissolvable, non-soluble types. But they're both great.
You say no bread? Is that any kind of bread? Absolutely none?
The question is no bread, absolutely no bread?
Yeah.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that.
It's so much comfort.
Use your judgment. And I do recommend that if you eat bread, that it be a very high fiber bread. I like the sprouted grain breads a lot because especially as I move through the decades and my body gets older, it becomes more and more important to manage that total carbohydrate intake. And there's less calories per slice and more fiber, because there's more fiber, of a sprouted grain bread than, say, some other bread. Oils are very, very important in the whole inflammation management scene. More omega-3 oil and the right balances of monounsaturated fats that are in olive oil and coconut oil and so on are anti-inflammatory, and too much saturated fat and transaturated fat is pro-inflammatory. And that's one of the topics that you're probably the best versed in from your study and exploration of the topic already. Down at the bottom, it covers no-nos of this page 4, much of which we've already touched on. I'm going to pull out. Yeah, this is fairly self-explanatory, but the one that some of you may not know about is the last one here, where it says down at the bottom, avoid browned foods with quotation marks around it, browned meats, browned breads. This is cookies, pastries, grilled food, the brown layer on the outside of my roast or my meatloaf, or the burger that I fried up in the pan or the frying pan or whatever. The brown part is called an advanced glycation end product, an AGE, and they promote very rapid aging of tissue. And if you'll flip over, I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail on page 5. These AGEs, what are they? Why do they matter? This is actually an important topic. I'm not saying don't ever eat any, but it's definitely smart to minimize your intake. This is potato chips are probably about 50% AGE because they're really thin and almost all that's left is the AGE.
It does include the crust on the bread then?
What's that?
It does include the crust on the bread?
The crust of the bread, absolutely. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So if you're one of those finicky children that wouldn't eat the bread crusts when you were little, that I used to think were really weird, well, I want to say I apologize. You were right.
You don't like tuna fish because of the mercury? Because I noticed you didn't when you listed the fish.
Right. I think eating tuna, especially the steak tuna, is a really risky idea these days. I don't have time to go into toxic metals too much here today, but do pay attention to at least to the rigor on the fish advisory fish advisory websites. For Washington Department of Health maintains one, the CDC in Washington maintains one. The albacore, the steak tunas contain a lot more mercury than some other fish choices. Better choice that many of you are aware of course, are the salmons, but a lot of it's about how large the fish is. A large salmon like a king has a lot more mercury in it than a smaller salmon like a pink or a coho. The lowest mercury fish are the little teeny ones like the sardines, because it's a food chain. They accumulate mercury by eating other fish that have mercury and to get bigger, and then eat another fish to get bigger. So then that mercury stays in their body and it's accumulated. So the bigger the fish and the more carnivorous it is, in general, the more mercury. And the longevity. And if they live longer, thank you. Which is why the tuna and everything out, and the big sushi grade tunas, they're really large old fish, relatively speaking. So their mercury contents are very high. It turns out when it comes to tuna that the inexpensive mushy kind has far less mercury than the fancy, far more expensive steak tuna. So if you can eat tuna, do eat the mushy kind. And eat it with a lot of fiber. Because, like I said, the fiber will soak up much of that mercury and keep it from being absorbed in the first place. So eat it with an apple or some psyllium husk powder. Doesn't that sound yummy? I didn't mean mixed together, although you could, I suppose. Anyway, advanced glycation end products.
Could we have a recipe in the next magazine?
Oh, we have a request for a recipe here. We'll see what we can do. Advanced glycation end products. What are they? Why do they matter? So, chips, French fries. But a quick digression. French fries. Remember, I'm harping over and over on inflammation, right? Inflammation contributes massively to doing in cells and the aging process. An interesting, somewhat scary experiment. Well, do you remember Super Size Me? Who saw Super Size Me? So good. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's about what we're talking about essentially. This guy committed to eating at McDonald's twice a day for just 30 days, and 3 meals a day, which is obviously a lot, but it was only a month, 30 days, and the other thing was if they offered him the supersize option, which I don't think they do anymore because of this movie, probably, he had committed that he would say yes, and then he had to eat it all. But it was just for a month. He almost died of acute toxic hepatitis. His physicians were frantically urging him to stop the program at day something like 24. He was at legitimate risk of dying from overwhelming toxic hepatitis. Why? Because so much inflammation was produced in his liver largely probably by all the superheated fats, oils, overheated oils, which are highly oxidized and highly oxidative and reactive oxygen, free radical, inflammation producing. So if you want to do an experiment, his liver enzymes, his liver tests were through the roof. He had acute hepatitis. They were afraid he was going to die of liver failure. I kid you not. On like day 24, like 3.5 weeks, is shocking. An experiment. If you take, of course you might have to eat some too, but buy some French fries. I know nobody here ever buys French fries, but next time you buy French fries, steal somebody else's French fries. You take a little bit of, take the fry and rub it on a delicate place, like the skin, right on the inside of your wrist, and look at it in about a half an hour. What's that? It'll turn pink. At least it does when I do it. Now, if you've got a really great anti-inflammatory control system, well, I haven't done it in a while. I'm eating better than I used to. Maybe it wouldn't do it for me anymore. But it'll turn pink. It's that inflammatory.
So you're rubbing the brown outside, or you're breaking it and rubbing.
Well, it's the superheated burn. It's the burned oil from the deep. It's the burned oil from the deep fryer that I'm talking about. It's the big problem in my little example here. But back to the advanced glycation end products, and once again I have to hurry up. But what happens is under the heat in the oven or on the grill or whatever in the deep fryer, a sugar molecule and a protein molecule that are in the potato chip in the hamburger or whatever that are next to each other are fused together at very high heat. It's a nearly unbreakable bond. It's a nearly unbreakable bond. So far, we have not identified. They're thought to be, once they get into our body, irreversibly, permanently linked together. They are pro-inflammatory, and they have one of the places they go is to our skin. They go to the lining of the blood vessels. Anything that's made out of connecting tissue, collagens and connecting tissues, including the skin. Remember I promised I'd give you some more tips on healthy skin. You want to do something really good for your skin, reduce your AGE intake dramatically, as well as your burned oil, deep fried food intake dramatically. And what they do is they clip into the collagens in our skin and in the lining of our blood vessels and other connective tissue-rich areas, and make it less and less flexible cumulatively over time. The more these AGE material gets incorporated, gets more stiff, more wrinkly, less compliant. And when you're talking about a blood vessel, that contributes to non-compliance, hardening, higher blood pressure, etc. So it's a big deal. It's not just cosmetic, it's a big deal. You can see here the list of conditions that, it's probably not a complete list of conditions that's been correlated with higher AGE consumption. They're in bold, from Alzheimer's disease to stroke to skin disorders. All right, I put a list of, in Roman numeral 3 here, a list of compounds and food items that are necessary for normal healthy skin, and jump to the skin is made out of a significant portion of the skin. The skin is living cells. And then types 1 and 3 collagen. There are a number of types of collagen, which is a protein, a long, skinny protein molecule that weaves together in a fibrous way that makes our skin tough. And what I want to bring to you is that in the bracket at the end, it says, hint, look at your fingertips and cuticles. This is a quick way to see if your skin is getting the nutrients it needs to be healthy. Now, assuming you're nervous chewing doesn't count. That confounds the experiment. You'll have to do some other experiment. But if you're not a chewer, if your cuticles are cracking really at all, but certainly more than a little bit, or on the sides, or up here at the base of the fingernail, or if you have little dry peeling occurring, blistering peeling, a little tiny peeling on the edge of your fingers where they rub together between them, these are the signs of not enough nutrients to maintain healthy skin. And there's the list of nutrients that you need for healthy skin. Why does it show up on the fingertips? This is some of the most rapidly dividing tissue in the body because we use it all the time. Every time I touch something or pick something up, I damage my skin a little. So I think the skin around it replaces itself like something like every 3 days on the tip of my finger. That's the inside of my mouth. It might be a few more, but it's really fast. It's really fast. And so nutrient deficiencies will show up because it's tissue that needs more nutrition. Does that make sense? They'll show up first here. Vitamin C, vitamin E, essential fatty acids. Anybody noticing cuticles that need help? Good. Outstanding. I'm preaching to the choir. All right. I talked a little bit about depuration processes, so I'll skip over that. And then nutraceuticals. And I'm really late, huh? So the first two are a couple of my favorites. The first three or four, actually. Curcumin and anybody here heard of or taken curcumin? All right. Super choice. These are plant curcumin and epigallocatechin gallate. Simple. You can all call it catechin or green tea, also known as green tea extract. That's number 2 there on page 5. Are a couple of the most marvelous, well-studied plant compounds that are potent, nearly universal antioxidants. And the reason they're first on the list is because they're so universal and because they're so potent. Their antioxidant ability, their ability to turn around that inflammatory inflammation process, oxidative tissue cell injuring process, is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times as strong as the antioxidant ability of vitamin C and vitamin E and selenium. Those of you who are my age were around in the 70s when we were reading Adele Davis and so on, and getting really excited and eating wheat germ and going to the cooler at the health food store and getting our vitamin E, and that was a good thing to do. And don't mean to be dissing vitamin E. Vitamin E is wonderful, but these plant compounds, it turns out, are orders of magnitude more powerful antioxidants and tissue protectors than even that. This is a new generation. And the thing I like about that, one of the things I like about it so much is it validates. I'm talking about nutraceuticals, by the way, means what you can buy in a pill. But these two, the reason I'm in love with them is because they really come from food. Now, if you want to get large quantities, you do have to go to a pill. It's difficult to get the quantities that we use to treat rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease or dementia of curcumin or catechin from diet. But combined with an outstanding diet, it's a really powerful one too. Many studies published about both of them. They do everything from control inflammation to slow the progression of virtually any condition related to a chronic inflammatory process. And you heard me earlier say that's almost all of them. Speed up recovery time after stroke. Actually stimulates new. I'm looking at curcumin here. Number 1, stimulates new brain cell growth. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Preventing metastasis of cancer. Actually causing cancer cells to die sooner, to actually go through that apoptotic process I talked about. The data, epigallocatechin gallate is a little bit different. It's, by and large, it's very similar. You can think of it in the same way. Curcumin will actually chelate iron and pull it out of an injured brain cell. Absolutely fascinating. Number 3 is N-acetyl. I forgot to spell it out. I'm sorry. Some of you know what NAC is. It's N-acetylcysteine. It's the principal beauty. There's just hundreds of papers published about N-acetylcysteine. The principal thing that it does is that it helps. It dramatically pushes on and strengthens the machinery inside the cell that makes ATP. Excuse me. Take that back. For the camera, change that. That produces glutathione. Glutathione I haven't mentioned yet, but some of you know what it is. Glutathione is the most potent universal antioxidant that our cells make. Present in every cell in the body. It's probably the most important antioxidant at a cellular level. The best way to get it right now, you can buy glutathione supplements. The best way to get it to increase its levels in our cells is to actually feed our cells things that help them make more glutathione. And that includes NAC, and it also includes compounds in that whole broccoli cabbage family I mentioned earlier. Another benefit from eating broccoli or cabbage family vegetables 1, 2, 3 times a day. Absolutely marvelous. Alpha-lipoic acid is both anti-inflammatory, and I'm on item 4 here. but it's also a cofactor in 4 enzymes inside the cells that are necessary for making that cellular energy molecule, the ATP. So it's both a potent energy promoter, energy availability promoter, and a potent anti-inflammatory as well.
What food do you get that from?
What's alpha-lipoic acid? Gosh. What food's it in? I believe, gosh, can I get back to you on that? Yeah, I think no, I don't think so. I think it's in animal products and meats, but I want to say it's in some vegetables too, and I'm going to have to look it up. It's in pills at super supplements. or in our dispensary. And I guess that was a gratuitous plug for, anyway. Probiotics, we talked about them earlier, reducing bowel permeability and reducing bowel toxicity and the ultimate effects that can have on managing or mismanaging inflammation processes in the body. I talked about omega-3 oils. What maybe some people don't know is that you don't have to just eat fish to get omega-3 oils. Actually pretty high levels in walnut and flax, hemp too. I'm sure some of you are taking hemp powders. But also, vegetables are very high in omega-3 oils on a dry weight basis. Now, there's a little bit of a trick to what I just said. Since vegetables are mostly water by far, there's not a whole lot of actual omega-3 oil in any given serving of vegetable, but it's not negligible. It's actually, when a person actually starts to eat that 60 to 70% of their total diet from the vegetable kingdom and high fiber fruits that I mentioned earlier in the cleansing, healing diet I mentioned, the amount of omega-3 oil that one is consuming at that point is considerable. And this is why you've read about how grass-fed meats and wild meats, wild deer, are very high in omega-3 oils. Why? It's because they're eating 100% vegetable diet. Does that make sense? The omega-3s started out in the vegetable kingdom, not something we talk about much. Eat your vegetables, ladies and gentlemen. Pomegranate juice, some of you have read about it. It's absolutely marvelous. The reports that it will slow or even in a significant number of cases reverse a plaquing process in the coronary arteries, reversing coronary artery disease. There are a number of compounds that have been shown to do this. The compounds in pomegranate juice are in the anthocyan group, which are the same compound group family that's in bilberry and blueberry. And some of you are probably already turned on to blueberry family fruits. Very, very wonderful group of antioxidants that are found in the purple and dark red fruits, and are these proanthocyanidins or the anthocyans. Wonderful broad spectrum antioxidants. I put number 10 here. I'm on page 6. You saw me turn the page. I'm on page 6. I put number 10 in as apples, which is sort of my sense of humor and a little bit manipulative, I admit. I don't want you to forget. I think pills are wonderful, but I meant to say this earlier, but I'll say it now. It's never too late. That if you've got a choice between taking a marvelous array of pills, these excellent supplements, these nutraceuticals I'm describing, and the research is fabulous on all of these, and eating that wonderful diet I talked about earlier, eat the diet. If you can afford one or the other, eat the diet. It's better. Research is trending that direction, and I think research is going to continue to trend in that direction. We can't beat Mother Nature's plan. It's absolutely marvelous. But if you can afford some of both, fine, absolutely. So much the better. There's you've heard a lot of the neat discussions about red wine and longevity in red wine, and the health promoting anthocyan compounds that are in red wine that are great for blood vessels and inflammation and so on are some 10 times higher in apples. Yeah, apples beat red wine.
I eat apples and I drink wine, so it's okay.
Better still.
Is it in the skin or in the?
It's in the skin.
It's in the skin.
It's in the skin.
Totally in the skin?
I don't know about totally, but I suspect so, because these are red and dark red and purple pigments, so I suspect so. Cellular, so those are anti-inflammatory compounds. And then cellular energy promoters. So it's all about controlling inflammation and making energy more available to the cells. They'll last longer. D-ribose is probably the single best. So these are compounds that feed the machinery, the enzymatic machinery inside the cells that make that ATP molecule I talked about, the energy molecule. And the single best nutrient for promoting that's been studied and reported to date is this D-ribose. Comes in a powder. It's not cheap. The really neat research going on for brain longevity, cardiovascular longevity, heart failure studies. It's wonderful. The therapeutic dose range is 5 grams 2 to 3 times a day.
Where does it come from?
D-ribose? D-ribose is a natural sugar that's as far as I know, available in all biosystems. And this is probably synthesized D-ribose that I'm buying. And it's easy to make. It tastes a little sweet.
Do you know what foods it comes from or what?
I've never looked. Thank you very much. If you look it up, let me know. jhibbs@bastyr.edu.
I called the company that produces Corvalin, which is a well-known
Yeah.
ribose, because I was suspecting that it was from corn. It is, but it's not from GMO corn.
Okay.
And it's some sort of a fermentation process that has to do with corn.
Neat.
And on the internet, look up Corvalin. You can get 3 tubs for $31 a tub. It's as expensive as $55.
Okay. And it's available at other good websites too, like Swansons.com and so on at great prices. Ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is worth knowing about. This is the newfangled CoQ10. A lot of you are probably taking CoQ10 and certainly have read about it. The ubiquinol has only been widely available for a couple of years, and it's going to replace the ubiquinone Q10 that we've all been taking and that many of you are probably still taking. It's far more absorbable, has a much longer half-life in the blood, it's far more bioactive. It costs a little bit more, but it's far more effective in much lower doses, so you wind up being quite a bit cheaper. Very potent therapeutic doses are in the 50 to 100 milligrams 1 to 3 times a day range. If you haven't switched from ubiquinone to ubiquinol and you are taking CoQ10, do make the switch. Magnesium, I mentioned earlier, it's one of many nutrient cofactors along with B vitamins and so on in the energy production inside cells. Where is magnesium? It's in vegetables, green vegetables, especially the leafy ones, and in nuts and seeds, and in all foods, but it's concentrated in those vegetables, and it's also concentrated in vitamin pills. That was a joke. So, carnitine. Some of you are taking L-carnitine or acetyl L-carnitine, another great ATP promoter. In a couple of papers that have been published in older men, and I believe there's a paper in process with postmenopausal women. It has testosterone-like effects of increasing brain tissue mass, muscle tissue mass, bone mass, cognitive functioning and memory skills, and so on. That's L-carnitine. And it's probably just brought about by its improving energy availability in those tissues, which leads to longevity. Whey protein branched chain amino acids. Number 5. Number 5 is interesting. This is something that's just come out in the last 6 months or a year. That our cells. Does anybody know what a mitochondria is? Mitochondria? A little bit from your cell biology, long ago. This is the little apparatus. It's a little cell within our cells. Within every cell in the body contains a little teeny, what's called an organelle, or a little round apparatus called a mitochondria, inside of which most of these energy-producing processes are run. Not all, but most. That's where most of the ATP is produced, most of the energy is produced. Well, we always thought that if you were born with a limited we were born with a finite number of mitochondria, and when they're gone, they're gone. It's coming out in the literature that our cells can actually make new ones, which shouldn't be a big surprise. Yet another way we're figuring out we can repair ourselves. But 2 of the nutraceuticals that have been shown to actually speed or promote this regeneration of mitochondrial numbers, which, as you can imagine, leads to better energy supply inside the tissue, are this special whey protein branched chain amino acids, and then this other fancy one, pyrroloquinoline quinone, quinine, or PQQ. I'm not saying run right out and buy these. Keep your eye on the literature and what you read. This is really pretty new stuff. I'm interested to see how, there's only been a few papers. I'm interested to see how it plays out. I don't think it's going to be dangerous. I think it's going to turn out to be true, but it also wouldn't surprise me that if we don't learn that eating a great diet and exercising well does the same thing. And it's a lot cheaper. Does that make sense? It makes you feel good too. And then miscellaneous, I've talked about, C now on the last part of page 6, fiber. I've talked about that quite adequately, but there actually is research that just shows that people who eat more fiber live longer, as well as the other things I talked about. Vitamin D3 helps both necessary for both normal immune function, inflammation control, and brain function. Some of you have probably read about number 3, nattokinase, which is an enzyme that results from slow fermentation of soy products, and very popular in Asia. And it turns out it's a clot dissolver. It's not appropriate to take this one or the next one, the vitamin K2, if you're on blood thinners, i.e. Coumadin in particular, or any one of the newer generation blood thinners. But if you're not on a blood thinner, it has very legitimate clot dissolving effects. We're talking about microclots here, preventing TIAs and strokes. If you're not on a blood thinner but you have a history of TIAs, you might come talk to your naturopathic doctor or read online about this one. It might be a very good choice for you. And then vitamin K2 in large doses, and 45 milligrams a day of vitamin K2. And this is in the MK. I should have written this down, but I forgot. It's not just any K2. It's in the capital M, capital K, -4, MK4 form. Has been shown to both reverse the plaquing process in arteries, similarly to what pomegranate juice did, and also increase bone mass, to reverse the osteoporotic bone loss process in men and women in the latter part of our lives. Why? It turns out it's the principal director. Vitamin K2 is the principal director of where calcium goes in the body. It's absolutely marvelous, fascinating, wonderful. Vitamin K2 is the natural product of any fermentation or aging food process. It's in aged cheese, it's in kimchi, it's in miso, it's in sauerkraut. And the longer the product is aged, the more vitamin K2 it contains. Some of the higher natural sources, dietary sources available to us are in North America are the most aged cheeses, for example. But you can't get this quantity, 45 milligrams a day, from just eating aged cheese. This is a boatload. This is a boat. It's found in cheeses in microgram doses. This is like a wheelbarrow full, and but it's interesting. What we're talking about here is redirecting calcium with vitamin K to where it belongs in the body. It'll take it out of the lining of the arteries where it's been put in these calcified plaques that are an important part of the arteriosclerotic process, and put it back in the bone. It'll take it from where it doesn't belong. It'll actually take it from the swollen, knobby, arthritic joint and put it back in the bone, slowly, albeit very, very slowly, which is appropriate. It's fascinating. It's the director and corrector of where calcium is and belongs in the body. Can you take too much? So far, there's no toxicity been reported, but it is expensive. And if you are on a blood thinner, don't take it. So I'm going to quit there, and I'll go ahead and take questions, and thanks so much for coming.